The March 10th, 2014 work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Judkins, call the roll, please.
Ms. Knudsen?
Here.
Mr. Pond?
Here.
Mayor Holloman? Vice Mayor Fryling?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
And if I may mention, Mayor Hallman will not be able to be with us today or on Thursday as he's traveling out of the country, and we wish him safe travels. First on our agenda for today, we have public comment. Anybody who wishes to address items that will be on the upcoming agenda for City Council on Thursday or any matter, you're welcome to come forward. I have one speaker's card, and that is from Mr. Shohan. And if anybody wishing to speak would give their name and address, and please limit your comments to not more than 5 minutes, if that's possible.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of City Council. Always nice to be before you, and thanks for this privilege and opportunity. I wanted to address something that's coming up, and you'll have a lot of focus and time spent on it. It also revolves around the budget, is the CIP. Rick Hines was here in the month prior, and he gave a presentation to Planning Commission, and the essence of that presentation that he gave was to bring awareness to 2nd Street. Currently, what was on the proposal for the Planning Commission was that there was lots of work to be done in the city, but 2nd Street had failed to be mentioned as any level of importance to revitalization. So Rick was kind enough to come and give a presentation where originally 2nd Street was not even so even vaguely mentioned in the recommendation. It moved up very, very high, almost as a top priority for underground wiring. So that's the reason for my presence here today. And I wanted to bring to your attention that I've contacted mostly all of the business owners on 2nd Street, and collectively, all of us feel the same way. There's a large amount of investment that's going on the 2nd Street quadrant, and we'd invite you all to come down in that neck of the woods and dine at some of the fine restaurants or other business establishments down there. But nevertheless, I probably won't take the same vein of information that Mr. Hines shared with Planning Commission, but he did point out some other roads in the city, namely South Henry Street, had a higher priority, and that's when he asked Planning Commission to reconsider their recommendations, which they had gone ahead and decided to reprioritize it. But the Northeast Triangle had mentioned that 2nd Street, along with Page Street, would benefit greatly by having some underground enhancements. I did pull together some pictures that I was going to share with Council today, but I'll probably resubmit it in a different vein. I didn't realize that I needed to come well prepared and have that submitted before, so I'll submit those, and actually I hope to be able to speak to you beforehand at another point in time to point out the investments on 2nd Street. But some of those things, as you may know, we did a renovation several years back ago and enhanced 2nd Street, at least our business, with over $1 million worth of enhancements. But also the Super 8 Motel right down the street has incurred over the last couple of years over $100,000 worth of enhancements. We have Capitol Green at the end of Capitol Landing Road and 2nd Street, which has recently been probably assessed in close to $5 million worth of assessments, and with another $2 million worth once that gets completed out. The Velvet Shoestring, as you're probably well aware, is under their renovation project. I met up with Jim Bennett today. He believes his assessment of the property is that they'll be at about $3.5 million once they're built out, with potentially another $4 million added when the residential component on the backside gets built out, and those plans have yet to be submitted, but conceptually they've been approved. On the corner of Page Street and 2nd Street is the 7-Eleven that's being built. Talked to the construction superintendent there today. Their investment's approximately $1.2 million. Debbie Wood with Bob's Upholstery, she has a dumpster can out in front of her business right now, and they're renovating and reworking that. They're under demolition right now, plans to renovate that inside and out, and her plan is to take the upstairs area and have that as Bob's Upholstery upstairs, which is will be a welcomed neighbor. GMC, as you're probably all aware, has just finished their remodel and as of last week moved over. Their commitment to that quadrant of the town is $1.3 million. And then that does not include, I'm not familiar with the condos behind us being built by Atlantic Realty. There's approximately 24 condos there, and I'm sure that they have a sizable commitment to that quadrant of town. And then the important part is we have some opportunities over there. The old Patriot Chevrolet building, which, as I understand, I think it's public knowledge because Rick mentioned it at Planning Commission, will be the new auto house, and they'll have some substantial investment as well there. We have the Willis Auto Wash that has moved out and been vacated, and so there is a little bit of derelict looking over there, but that's going to get rehabbed. I guess the picture that I'm trying to paint for you is that there's substantial investment on the private sector. We'd like to see some public investment of dollars. I have to go to the bank and borrow for what I anticipate to be a good business decision and money well spent to invest in our property and enhance what we do to get a better perceived outcome. I and all the other owners on 2nd Street would ask the city to do the same thing. If it means that we don't have it in our general fund, or if there's not enough to go around in the CIP, which I understand that happens, then maybe we consider taking out a loan if we need to. But reinvest in the business community that's investing in the city. Because don't forget, on 2nd Street, unlike Henry Street, we actually generate tax dollars to put that back in so that other funds can be generated and dispersed throughout the city. So I would guesstimate with the tax base of what we bring along with all those businesses along there, we're actually carrying our load, and we generated quite a bit of the tax base. So we'd appreciate some aggressive consideration and get some funding on 2nd Street to do some of the things. You know, it's not just aesthetic, although to steal a line from my neighbor, David Coventry, when we were doing most of these studies in Northeast Triangle, and he made a presentation, he says, you know, you come up over the Page Street Bridge, and it looks like you're entering into the 50s and 60s. Well, there is some truth to that. Well, no longer is it on Page Street only, but it's just 2nd Street. We've managed to bring it up to contemporary times on Page Street. But the enhancements are well appreciated on Page Street. The view shed over there is incredible and welcome. But I'll probably be visiting you quite a bit throughout the planning process, and just hope if you could consider my points that I bring before you today. Thank you for your time and your service.
And Mr. Chauhan, thank you for your service to this community and your continuing civic engagement. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to address council at this time? Seeing none, that will take us to council preview. Do any members have questions for Mr. Tuttle or need more information for Thursday's meeting? No. That takes us to background presentations and discussion. The first is the Williamsburg Regional Library fiscal year 2015 budget presentation. Mr. Tuttle, will you be starting this off?
I will, sure, kick things off. As part of our all of the process we go through for adopting the budget, one thing is to hear directly from the library board and the library director to present their budget to the city. And in the meetings that come in the next several weeks, we'll hear from the schools and all the other major entities that come to the city that we provide funding for. So with that, I'm not sure who's going to kick things off. I believe it's going to be
That would be me.
Genevieve Owen, the library director.
Well, good afternoon, Vice Mayor Freiling and members of City Council. It's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm a familiar face in a very new role. I have been director of Williamsburg Regional Library for all of 10 days now. And it's my pleasure to be with you. I'm also here with our Finance and General Services Director, Carrie Binsfeld, who has been instrumental in the crafting of the library's budget for many years now. I'm also here with Sarah Hoagland, who is a city representative on our Library Board of Trustees, as well as Jim Axtell, who serves in a similar role. Kira Cook, who is also a city representative on the library board, is not able to be with us due to a work conflict. And our chair, Jean Van Tol, is unexpectedly ill and sends her regrets to you. I also want to mention a final member of our Board of Trustees who's an integral part of our process, and that is Vicki Herrick of the city staff, who is the official staff representative on the Board of Trustees. And before I go into the budget itself, the proposed budget itself, I really want to acknowledge the extraordinary amount of time and effort that our entire board put into the library director search process. And there was a special contribution of leadership in that process from Jean Van Tol. As I've often said to her, Jean wasn't expecting to sign up for that duty when she agreed to chair the board, but she stepped into the role with exceptional skill and grace. And I believe that that very intensive search process made for a stronger board and gave me, as a first-time library director, very clear expectations to meet. And I think that strength and that clarity really benefit the Williamsburg Regional Library and, most importantly, the users that we serve. So I want to mention that this fiscal year 2015 proposed budget marks the first time that York County has participated as a signatory to the fifth amended and restated contract for library services. And I'll be reviewing the revenue side of our proposed budget in a moment. But first, if I could draw your attention to the proposed budget that's in your packet. On the expenditure side, I just wanted to review the three main categories that we have in those expenditures. The first one has to do with compensation for library staff members. As you may recall, by contract, Williamsburg Regional Library staff members, with the exception of the director, are considered to be employees of James City County and therefore follow James City County personnel policies and procedures. So in crafting the compensation section of the budget, we rely very heavily on the guidance being provided by James City County in the area of salaries and benefits. And the information that we have at this stage in the process is somewhat preliminary, and so we expect that these figures will be finalized as we move through the budget process with James City County. You'll notice that there is a slight decrease in salaries and wages and a variety of associated benefits expenditures, and that's a function of the fact that we have hired a number of new staff members in recent years who have filled positions that have been priorly occupied by long-time incumbents who moved over time through their salary structures. So in other words, we're bringing in some new staff people at lower rates of compensation than their predecessors, but that's a very natural evolution and not something that I would have you take in any other way. The one area where we are anticipating some increases is in the health insurance costs. And still, that's the jury's very much out on what those increased costs will be and how James City County and employees will apportion the increase in those costs. So again, these compensation numbers will change, although we don't expect them to change appreciably. In the area of collections expenditures, we are asking for an increase of almost $44,000 or 10%, and this is new money in the collections budget. It is our beginning attempt to regularize the expenditures that we're making for e-books in the collection. Up until this point, our expenditures for e-books have been covered by generous grants from our friends of Williamsburg Regional Library. I often refer to that group as our venture capitalists. They're the ones we go to when there's an emerging technology that we're not exactly sure is going to be right for Williamsburg Regional and the users we serve, but we think it has a lot of potential and it's something that we want to experiment with. And we have been experimenting with e-books for several years now. They are becoming a very regular part of our collection now and increasingly heavily used. And so we're eager to account for those expenditures in an ongoing operational way rather than just special grants. And then in the operations side of our expenditures, we just have a number of areas like utilities and postage where the cost of things is simply increasing, and so we're trying to reflect those increased costs in our operations lines so that these can be accurate estimates of what we are likely to need in the way of expenditures. So you'll see at the bottom of that proposed budget that we are asking for an increase overall of $78,571, an increase of just 1.28% on the expenditure side. Then if we could segue into the revenue side on page 5 of your packet, you will see that there are contributions coming on the government side of things from the City of Williamsburg, from James City County, from York County, and from state aid to public libraries. And the three jurisdictions' contributions are very much governed by a funding formula that's in that fifth amended and restated contract. And that is a funding formula that is based on circulation of materials amongst the three jurisdictions. We track those extremely carefully so that we know what percentage of circulation is attributable to the city residents, what percentage is attributable to James City residents, and what percentage is attributable to York County. You will also note in the Fifth Amended and Restated Contract that York County is only responsible for 80% of its circulation percentage. And that's, again, a result of the contract and is also reflected in the privileges that we afford to York County users. They are only afforded 80% of the privileges that are afforded to City of Williamsburg and James City County residents. So there is some parity there in terms of the responsibility and then the privileges that York County is afforded. And then the state aid to public libraries passes through the Library of Virginia. Due to the funding formula for that that's in the state code, we anticipate a modest decrease in those funds. And we're still having our fingers crossed that the Virginia legislature, under the leadership of Senator Normant, will actually be able to give a little bit more in state aid to public libraries should agreements be reached with the two chambers plus the governor. So stay tuned on the state aid number. We're cautiously optimistic that that will increase and therefore decrease the responsibility on the three funding jurisdictions, or at least on the City of Williamsburg and James City County. Another stipulation in that amended and restated contract is that no jurisdiction's contribution will decrease from one year to the next. And that's a function of the state aid formula, because if a jurisdiction's contribution were to decrease from one fiscal year to the next, that could put that entire pot of state aid money in jeopardy. So there's a reason for that consistency to continue to qualify for state aid. And then you'll finally see on the revenue side a series of funds that are generated by Williamsburg Regional Library through a variety of functions that we offer. We certainly charge for things like the use of our copy machines and for our printing, for library fines and fees. We participate in the state's set-off debt program so that when a library user has outstanding fines and fees and is eligible for a return on her state income tax, that part of that return can come to the library after other outstanding obligations are satisfied with the state. And then we do generate some revenue through the use of our meeting rooms. So you will see that the total request in revenue matches the increase that we are requesting on the expenditure side. So we are, at least at this stage, presenting you a fully balanced budget and would expect to do so in the future. So with that very brief review, I'd be delighted to entertain any questions that you might have.
Well, before we ask any questions, I'm sure my colleagues will express the same sentiment. Welcome. It's terrific to have you. I'm sure the library board and the entire library staff is thrilled to have someone of your capacity in the role as director and somebody who's so familiar with the operation to begin with. And it's a pleasure to be able to publicly say this for the first time here today.
Oh, thank you so much. I've been so touched by the outpouring of support from this community. It's just been overwhelming, and I can assure you that I'm going to need every bit of it going forward, so keep it coming.
Just remind us later on.
Yeah.
And thanks also to Ms. Binsfeld, Mrs. Hoagland, and Mr. Axtell for being here. We very much appreciate that. And now I'll turn it to my colleagues for questions or comments. Mr. Foster.
Don't know that I have any questions, but I look forward to, I guess just to say, I look forward to supporting the library. There's no question that what you all do in our community is well received. I haven't spoken to anybody that doesn't believe it's not a valuable commodity and isn't worth funding. And I think everybody would agree with that. One of the things that I do like about the model that we operate here under with the library is these use of public dollars. Everybody in our community gets to participate in what happens at the library, regardless of other contributions that they have to make personally, and there isn't really an exorbitant fees attached to using the library. And so I think this is a good model. There are other organizations that we fund that don't operate that way, and that's a different discussion. But continue the good work, and look forward to getting the city manager's budget, and hopefully he'll see his way to making sure you're funded.
Terrific, thank you.
I do have a couple of questions, but before I start that, I just ran into somebody who just moved to Williamsburg, and they didn't move because of the library. They moved for all the reasons people move to Williamsburg, and she said, but when they found the library, that was it. They're staying. They're never going to move again because it was an unanticipated bonus, she said. Actually, I wondered about the e-books. What does an e-book cost? How much? What are we going to get for our $10,000?
Well, that's a marvelous question. And if I really had the answer, I wouldn't be working here because it is such an evolving field where the players' participation and the way they participate changes appreciably, practically with every passing week. E-books are a very tricky area for public libraries right now. The publishers of e-books are extremely concerned about public libraries' impact on their revenue stream. They really watched what happened to the music industry and how drastically it was changed, and quite frankly, how close they came to the brink of not existing there with all of the file sharing that was going on many years ago. And so they are extremely concerned that if they sell an e-book to a public library, that somehow that is going to take away from their revenue stream with an individual user. So there have been a variety of responses to that concern. There are some publishers who refuse to sell their e-books to public libraries, period. And the American Library Association has been working actively with the publishing community to help persuade them that selling e-books to libraries is actually an investment in their future, and that we have to be able to find models that will be successful both for the public library and its users and for the publishers. There are other publishers who will sell an e-book to a public library, but rather than selling that e-book at the rate that they sell it on Amazon, for example, let's say a $20 e-book or a $10 e-book, they are increasing the price of that title to $85 for a public library, with the idea that this is a way of protecting their revenue stream. Still, other publishers have said, well, we'll sell you the e-book, but once you've circulated it 26 times, you have to buy it again.
Really?
And then, fourthly, I will tell you that at least in the e-book models that we have been using to date, we are actually not buying them. We are leasing them. So if I were to stop paying the platform fee to the vendor who provides us with our e-books right now, we would no longer have access to any of the e-books that we quote-unquote bought. So it is an extremely complex and evolving market where there's a certain amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt all the way around, and that doesn't always make for the most generous or publicly inclined behavior. The other item that I will tell you about e-books is that the publishers are also operating on a very print model of selling e-books, and by that I mean even though we all know that everyone in this room could access the same file at the same time, they're still operating on the one book, one reader model. So if I want to have 10 people have access to an e-book at one time, I have to buy or lease 10 copies of that title. So is this the situation in which I want us to find ourselves 5 years from now? Absolutely not. It is the situation that is available to us at the moment, and we're making the best of it that we can.
Thank you. Interesting.
Simple question, really complicated answer. And I'm probably not touching on the full range of nuances here.
Thank you.
Oh, trust me, Mr. Moorman has warned us in the past about the evils of e-books when it comes to public libraries. I want to say, first of all, congratulations, and I know this goes back a ways, but it applies to everybody, on the library staff and the jurisdiction staffs working together to arrive at an arrangement where now the Williamsburg Regional Library will be able to more fully serve the residents of York County. I know they're not getting 100% of the privileges, but I believe that the accommodation that you've been able to come to, where 80% of the services for 80% of the circulation fee is able to be exchanged, is a huge benefit to those people, and in some ways very much a benefit to the library community as well. And you all do so much more than just serve as a repository for books or ebooks or CDs. I mean, all the programming you do is terrific. I do have a couple of questions, though. Oh, and let me also say, what a terrific job at keeping the overall budget increase at 1.28%. I think that's remarkable and a testament to the good work that your staff does. But where do you see salaries going in the next couple of years?
That is going to be very much dictated by the James City County Board of Supervisors and what they wish to do in terms of offering merit increases to staff members, in terms of what they want to do with recalibrating positions within the organization. I would be hopeful that we would be able to find ourselves in the very near future in a situation where staff would once again be eligible for merit increases. We certainly enjoyed one previous fiscal year, and that was the first one in 5 years that we had been eligible for. And it does affect our ability to attract and retain the best and the brightest. And so again, if I knew the answer to that question for sure, I wouldn't be working here, because I would have a crystal ball and I would be able to sell that kind of knowledge in a much more viable market. But I'm cautiously optimistic, and I've gotten this from some of the county staff people, including Sue Mellon, who is on our Board of Trustees, some cautious optimism about upticks in the economy that would make merit increases a possibility going forward.
And help me understand one of the comments you made earlier, that if the state aid increases, the city's increased component of funding and James City County's increased component of funding could be reduced, not below last year's level.
No.
But would it not have an impact on the allotment that York County would be providing?
It would not affect York County's contribution, because York County's contribution is already budgeted to be level.
Okay.
So it would not affect the York County part of that equation.
Going forward, would it be distributed evenly?
It could.
Okay.
It could.
And lastly, could you explain, with fines and lost books in both categories, we're expecting less revenue. Is that a reflection of some greater controls that are being placed? I don't see any less fines going out of my household for the books that come and go from the libraries.
Well, and we thank you.
We have very good intentions, by the way.
I know, and we thank you for your contributions to the Williamsburg Regional Library from the Freiling household. No, there's actually two things in play here, and they're very much connected to each other. First of all, on fines, we've done an extraordinary job in making it relatively easy for a user to avoid fines, because we send pre-overdue notices to people's email reminding them that their library materials are coming due soon and they may want to either go online or call us to renew those materials. We're also offering those notifications via text message as well. So we're making it really easy to avoid overdue fines. Not that that necessarily applies to everyone, and we're glad of it. But in being so helpful to our users, we have, in some instances, decreased our library fine revenue. Our print circulation is going down, and when you have print circulation going down, it actually is the sign of a recovering economy. I can tell you, in the depths of the recession, our circulation was going off of the charts, and it was a sign of how stretched people were being, and the way they were turning to Williamsburg Regional Library in lieu of having high-speed internet at home, in lieu of subscribing to Netflix, in lieu of purchasing materials at their local bookstore or via Amazon. And so our print circulation is going down, and so therefore we have fewer things to be lost. The other thing that's happening with e-books is that when you check out an e-book, it automatically self-destructs on your device. when it is due. So it does not generate overdue fines for the library. And no one has been able to figure out how to circumvent that auto-destruct feature, because, of course, that's a feature that the publishers really need and want to be comfortable with loaning an ebook. They want to be able to have that digital rights management and have that book self-destruct. So when it self-destructs, it can't generate an overdue fine.
Well, perhaps you should take a lesson from the cable company and charge an auto-destruct fee. Anything else? Thank you, Ms. Owens.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
This takes us to Stormwater Management Program update.
Yes, sir. Just last month, we spent quite a bit of time talking about wastewater management and what all the changes that are happening in that arena. So we're back to something that sounds similar, but this is storm sewer, not sanitary sewer, and this is all the changes that are coming our way in the stormwater management program. So what we've asked our city engineer, Aaron Small, to give a briefing, back up a little bit with some history and some basic understanding of the issues, and then to go over what's ahead of us by way of stormwater management ordinance changes and some of the things the city will have to do to meet the environmental mandates of the state and federal government. So, Aaron.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Reed. Good day, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of City Council. Again, I'm Aaron Small, the City Engineer in the Department of Public Works and Utilities. I'm here to provide a brief update of the stormwater program because we do have a few modifications that we need to make to the ordinances and some of our programs in the next few months. And it's mainly due to some relatively recent changes that we've made. My overall presentation is going to start with kind of a brief discussion of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, which I'll define a little better in a minute. Then we'll follow into what's known as the city's municipal separate storm sewer system permit, affectionately easily said as the MS4. And then finally into our Virginia Stormwater Management Program construction permit that is coming down to the city. First, I want to get, before we get into the detail of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, though, I do have a few overall definitions to start with. First thing I'm going to hit you with is the CWA, which is the Clean Water Act of 1972. And if you see, we've got a lot of acronyms here. I think only the military outperforms the environmental regulators in acronyms. The Environmental Protection Agency is the agency that is slated to oversee the Clean Water Act, and then they dictate that down to the state, to the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, known as DEQ. DEQ, to administer the Clean Water Act, has developed the Virginia Pollution Discharge Elimination System, known as VPDES, and as part of that program, which regulates all discharges into the state, they've developed the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Permit, the MS4, and that's for varying size cities with different requirements depending on your size. Of that, it requires us to administer best management practices for treating that stormwater. And a BMP, most people when they think of a BMP, they're thinking of that pond that I see out there. But that's not necessarily true. There's certain BMPs that are as simple as me performing this public presentation on stormwater. It's a means of our public education, which is a BMP. Next thing we have on there is what we call total maximum daily loads, TMDLs. Our specific one that I want to talk to you about in a minute is the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. And what that is it's a specific load that's applied to a certain impaired water body, and it is the maximum load of pollutant that can be taken up by that water body before it is considered impaired. So in certain water bodies, once they're impaired, then what's developed to treat that total maximum daily load is a watershed implementation plan, also known as a WIP. And then following that, we also have a program of that watershed implementation in Virginia for the Chesapeake Bay is the Virginia Stormwater Management Program. And I'll get into those a little bit later. But those kind of give you an idea of some background.
Before you go on, may I ask you one question about the
Yes, sir.
TMDL? Since most bodies of water feed into other bodies of water, does the TMDL factor cascade?
Somewhat it does, not always though, because you may have pollutants that affect a smaller body of water. Say it affects, in this case, we have a TMDL on Queens Creek for bacteria. However, there's not a TMDL on the York River for bacteria. And that's because the York River is a much larger body of water, and so it can absorb more heavier loads. But it might be that the upstream water itself is impaired for certain reasons.
Thank you.
First item I mentioned was the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, and I want to give you a little bit of history here to kind of explain it. In 1998, the EPA noted that the Chesapeake Bay was not meeting its water quality standards, and it was specifically impaired for high sediment loads, high nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients. And what that was causing was all kinds of grasses to grow up, high algae loads, low shellfish returns. In 2005, Virginia began work on trying to address some of these concerns, knowing that the EPA was coming down with a TMDL, and they began work on a plan called the Tributary Strategies Program. Just to give you an indication, Virginia was not the only one hit with this. We also, the Chesapeake Bay watershed, as you can see the rough delineation there, it's 6 states and the District of Columbia. It includes Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and West Virginia. It's about 64,000 square miles and is the largest estuary in North America and the 3rd largest in the world. It's the home to about 17 million people. And just to kind of put that in perspective, the city of Williamsburg is 9 square miles, or 0.014% of the watershed. And we house about just over 14,000 people, which is about 0.083%. So we're literally a drop in that big bucket. In November of 2010, in anticipation of greater concerns from the EPA, Virginia submitted its Phase 1 watershed implementation plan, the Phase 1 WIP, and it was largely based on the work from the Tributary Strategies Program. It basically hit those plans to meet the targets within each individual sector that discharge. Now, those sectors range from wastewater, agriculture, septic systems, forest lands, mining, as well as urban and suburban stormwater. So we weren't just picked on for ourselves. There's much other target areas as well that are polluting the bay. So in December of 2010, only about a month later, EPA accepted the Phase 1 WIP, and then they came back and issued the Chesapeake Bay's TMDL to all of those states with specific load allocations to those large MS4 permittees, and those are the cities and municipalities that are over 100,000 people. So those are the large ones, but it basically said to the Virginia cities, here's your portion of the overall Chesapeake Bay pollutants, and then we're reserving this other little bit. We're going to hit the smaller guys later. But it was only in Virginia that occurred. So Virginia responded to some of those improper allocations because they felt they were being picked on unfairly by the EPA, and they began preparation of a Phase 2 watershed implementation plan that said we're going to look at this on a larger perspective and hit it from statewide. How are we going to address this? In March, 2 years ago, my predecessor, Steve Martin, came forth to you and gave you an update on overall stormwater updates. And this is actually a slide, his last slide of his presentation. And what he asked there was kind of, at this point in time in March of 2012, we were awaiting feedback from the EPA and DCR on the draft Phase 2 WIP. It had not yet been published. The city's permit would need to be renewed in July of 2013. And then the Ches Bay TMDL implementation plan would be formalized and included in the renewed permit. The city's stormwater ordinance and plan needed to be updated to meet what was then draft regulations by July of 2014. And at the time, the costs were really to be determined based on level of effort because we didn't know what the WIP was going to say. So what I'd like to do is follow up on a lot of these questions. First, the Virginia's Phase 2 WIP was published about 3 weeks after you were given your presentation. It provided that detailed description of the different target areas for Virginia to meet their goal. One of the things they promised was that they were going to revise the MS4 permit conditions at the next cycle as they were issued to each of the localities that were large enough to require them. It also revised the stormwater regulations that were statewide. And some key provisions of that would be revised stormwater quality standards for new development, greater reductions for redevelopment, shifting compliance of the state-run VSMP construction permits down to the localities, requiring long-term inspection of those permanent BMPs that were privately owned, as well as provisions for collecting, distributing, and expenditure of the VSMP fees and additional record-keeping and reporting requirements. Now, a few of these were not new to the people that had MS4 permits, but they were going to mean some additional requirements, and I'll go over that in a few minutes. The other things that the Phase 2 WIP hit in the urban-suburban sector, and this is just the urban and suburban sector items. There was a whole bunch of other stuff for the other target sectors, but they really didn't concern the city, so I don't need to really get into those. The urban nutrient management ban was a big one, where they statewide, they got rid of phosphorus. You can't buy it in regular fertilizers anymore, except what was available in stocks. Contractor applicator reporting requirements is another thing they did statewide, and they also required golf courses to submit nutrient management plans, which is important for our few large golf courses within the city. So now we get to the City of Williamsburg's MS4 permit. It is required by the Clean Water Act because we are considered a small MS4 owner-operator of a storm sewer system. And small means urbanized areas, according to the census, where the population is between 10 and 100,000, or we have a density of 1,000 per square mile. If you take out the students, we fall under the density requirement, but not the total population. Our first permit was issued in December of 2002. It was renewed again in 2008 and again in 2013. 2013, we got a renewal with new conditions. Similarly, James City County, York County, the College William and Mary, Eastern State Hospital, and VDOT are all considered small MS4 permittees. So we all have the same conditions for our permits. Part of that permit, it breaks down to 6 minimum control measures, plus this year, in 2013, they added these new TMDL special conditions. I want to go over each one of the minimum control measures. The first one, as I mentioned, was public education and outreach. It's mostly performed through our regional participation efforts in the HRPDC as well as AskHRGreen.org. You've probably heard the commercials on the radio, and that's actually due to part of our funding. If you remember last year, we came before the board asking for a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement with the HRPDC to perform some of this work. So this is actually part of that. part of that does is distribute flyers at the farmers market, Earth Day, library, and city offices. It also involves regional training efforts. We also keep our city website up to date with this information. But new for 2013, we're to identify 3 high-priority issues and target those audiences, and then also show contact with 20% of those target audiences per year. We're planning on working with the HRPDC to actually perform those additional requirements. MCM number 2 involves public involvement, participation. This is where we use the city website to post our public reports and solicit comment on those in our program. We also have a lot of local participation efforts done throughout the year, include those litter cleanups, participation with VIPS's Household Collection Day, Earth Day activities. Here you see Mrs. Rojek out at the farmers market distributing stuff and making sure the public knows what stormwater is all about. We also send out emails on ecograms. No new requirements under that category. Minimum control measure number 3 has to do with illicit discharge detection and elimination, known for short as IDDE. This includes basically inventorying your system, knowing what you have. And I can tell you, right now we have only mapped a little over about 2,000 structures, and we're not halfway done. This has to do with locating every end of pipe, every junction, every little inlet, so that we know where every piece of our storm sewer system is and every piece of pipe. They've asked us, we also coordinate with other adjacent MS4 operators, because there's many locations you can think of where a pipe running down Richmond Road, all of a sudden it connects to an outlet that's owned by VDOT. So whose stormwater is it? That's where it gets complicated, and we make sure we know where our jurisdiction ends and theirs begins. We also have similar issues of coordination with the college. Those are probably our 2 largest interconnections. Second one is illicit discharge ordinance. We've actually had this in place for many years, and that prevents people from actually, if you see dumping, it's illegal in the city. You can't dump your oil down the storm drain. If it's not storm water, it shouldn't be in the storm sewer system. And that basically comes down to what our ordinance says, and it does have fines associated with it. So that's part of this minimum control measure. We also do dry weather screening. Once a year we go check certain pipes at the end. In the past we've only had to do about 15 per year, and that's changing. And what we do is we just test to see if there's pollutants. Occasionally, and very occasional, we'll actually find something in our test that's not supposed to be there. And then we track it down to find out what's causing it. The other thing that's part of this portion of the ordinance is hazmat spills. That's mostly performed by the fire department, making sure that those are taken care of. We also have sanitary sewer overflows. We just have to document those, as well as our sanitary sewer maintenance operation. And this is where we see a blend of the previous work that we'd done mixed with the stormwater ordinance. New for 2013 under the IDDE section is we have to complete all of our mapping by 2017, which is somewhat of a bigger task than I think a lot of people realize. And then increasing our outfall screening has gone from 15 per year to 50. We have about 82 outfalls, I think, is at our last count. So what we'll do is we'll do 25 annually, and then the other we'll kind of do on a rotating basis so that we hit the big 50 every year. But that's a major increase. We will also have to provide written procedures for those other non-sewer spills. What do you do when you investigate, all of a sudden there's grease found or some oily substance leaking down a roadside gutter? We have to have a written procedure in place to investigate those and make sure we find the cause and the cleanup efforts. And then finally, we need to update our IDDE ordinance. That's just a matter of a small language change to make sure that it complies with state regulations. Our fourth minimum control measure has to do with construction site stormwater runoff control. Most of this minimum control measure is administered and enforced through our erosion and sediment control ordinance and all through our planning division and code compliance. Last year, they performed 813 inspections on 31 active land disturbing permits within the city. And that seems like a lot, and it is. We have to identify those permits that are larger than an acre, which fall under that state-run VSMP registration. Those include 7 of the 31 active permits would fall under that. I think 3 or 4 of them were actually in quarter path. We also, that staff also has to maintain their certifications with the state and participate in regional training, usually through the HRPDC or other state-run training. And new for 2013, this was a biggie, is the permits, the state-run VSMP permits are shifting from the state to the city's responsibility. Then under post-construction stormwater management, this one minimum control measure is mostly run through the Public Works Department. It includes reviewing plans and having different development standards for quantity and quality, and that's all listed outlined in the current stormwater ordinance. We have BMP maintenance agreements with owners of BMPs to make sure that they're properly maintained in perpetuity for which they're supposed to be treating the stormwater. And then finally, we do BMP inspections. We have about 80 or so BMPs within the city, and we actually do much better than a lot of other places. We're able to inspect almost all of our BMPs every year. And we provide those inspection reports to the owners so that they can make sure that anything that's non-compliant, they can bring them into compliance before we have to move to any next steps according to their maintenance agreements. Finally, the other thing is the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, making sure that our program that is run through the planning division or planning department is all in compliance with the state regulations, and we've had no issues there at all. New for 2013 is they've rewritten the state regulations for quality standards for new development and redevelopment, so we have to implement those. We also have to have written inspection procedures for all of our BMPs and provide a method other than agreements for owner maintenance of on-lot BMPs. If you wanted to put a rain garden in your backyard and allow the city to take credit for it, we need to come up with some other way other than a legal owner maintenance instrument that will allow us you to maintain that document. And finally, we have operation and maintenance manuals to be prepared for those city-maintained BMPs. And just to kind of give a perspective, the city actually owns 11 between the city, the Redevelopment Housing Authority, and the school system. There are 11 municipally owned BMPs. Then the last minimum control measure in our MS4 permit has to do with pollution prevention and good housekeeping. Now this is all public works, and it includes our city employee training, making sure that the EMS team that is run in public works and at the city shop is all trained, and we've done excellent at this. We're probably one of the best in the state. And we also do additional training through the HRPDC memorandum of agreement. Part of our pollution prevention includes our street sweeping and leaf collection, and also, again, I mentioned maintaining our E4 certification for the city shop. New for 2013 that we have to do for our municipal operations is we need to create nutrient management plans for those areas where we manage the turf. Have to be applying the fertilizer, and then they have to be larger than an acre. So any large lawn areas that we manage, we just need to make sure we're putting down just the right amount of fertilizer, or we do other options to not have to minimize that. So that actually is a good thing because it actually helps us save money as well. We also have to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is just a certain formatted document for our city shop and that'll have to be implemented by June 30th of 2017. And then we also have to extend our training that was originally just done for our city shop to our Parks and Rec staff, as well as our making sure our emergency response personnel training has been documented. The last thing we have on our new permit are the TMDL special conditions. And I'm breaking this into two things because we have two types of TMDLs that we have to deal with, Chesapeake Bay and non-Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay TMDL special conditions require us to reduce the levels of pollutants of concern over the next 3 permit cycles, 5% by 2018, 35% by 2023, and 100% by 2028. That gives us 15 years to do it. However, 5% is going to be easy. That's easy to meet in the first 5 years. It's the next steps are much bigger bites to try to get to meet those. The pollutants of concern that I'm talking about are sediment loads, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Part of what this special condition requires us to do is to come up with an action plan, which will be a set format report that'll have to be implemented for the first permit cycle reductions, that first 5%, and we have to have that report done by the end of the next fiscal year. And implemented, not just written. It has to be started and acted on. So that'll be something I'll be bringing forth to council next year, likely. These reductions are based upon the 2009 land use data, and we just received this last month, what our impervious cover is for the entire city, and we're just now getting those concepts into place. Project ideas are to be prioritized in an update to our stormwater management plan, and we're just getting those formulated right now because we knew this was coming. And then finally, just to give you an idea on how to meet these conditions, the city has applied for a grant for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We're looking to start feasibility studies so we'll know exactly what projects need to be implemented and when, and what more detail. And that way we can isolate exactly what those costs are. Because still, just like back when Steve did it 2 years ago, I told you the cost is going to be based on the level of effort. We're just now getting to where we'll know in the next few months exactly what the level of effort we're going to have to hit. So now we need to figure out what we're going to do, and that'll be outlined in that TMDL action plan. The other TMDLs that we have to deal with are the non-Chesapeake Bay. We have 2 creeks that are listed as impaired waters. It's actually 3 creeks, but 2 of them are lumped together. The first one is Queens Creek. Queens Creek is actually this area up here in yellow, as well as this small area up on the Richmond Road corridor that drains directly to Waller Mill Reservoir. Queens Creek is impaired for bacteria load. There's just a lot of bacteria heading into that creek. That TMDL was issued in conjunction with, we received it, York County received it, and also the Navy, because that's who drains into it. What they do is they take out an allotment for wildlife. They realize that, animals are out there and you can't stop that. But the main impairments that they see are septic system leachate, sewer overflows, those kind of things within that basin. I will tell you for the Queens Creek Basin, York County has done a lot to put Queens Lake on sewer system, and we think, and also Camp Perry's done a lot of upgrades to their sewer system. So I believe that they're going to carry a lot of the load. So I think a lot of that may not be as bad as we think. But the other creek that we have is Powhatan Creek, which is located up here. It's the skip-width kind of area up in that section of the city. It's 399 acres, and the other portion is Mill Creek, which includes these little areas of Berkeley School, a small area of near Strawberry Plains, and then finally this little teeny area down here in the Governor Berkeley Professional Center. That's only That's only about 40 acres that goes into Mill Creek. But both of those creeks are impaired also for bacteria. And that TMDL was issued also to William & Mary, James City County, and Eastern State Hospital. So we'll have to all work together to treat that action plan. Those action plans need to be implemented. We've got an extra year for those because of when they were done, and those will have to be implemented by June 30th of 2016. So we now come to the stormwater management ordinance changes. Again, these are required to comply with the MS4 permit. There is current proposed legislation that would limit when these programs have to be made, but those do not apply to those localities that have an MS4 permit. So we're not going to be allowed the opt-out provision of that proposed legislation. What it does is it does maintain our program that we have for our regional ponds and our open space credit system. I've made sure that stayed in there in the stormwater ordinance. It updates our development standards so that we comply with the state regulations for the new runoff reduction method. We also update our illicit discharge language. It also shifts the regulation oversight from DCR to DEQ. That's more of just a numbers change of the regulation when everything was shifted last year. And it also sets those program requirements and the fees for issuing and monitoring the VSMP activity, the construction permits. And this is, as I said, this was the major overhaul, was the VSMP permits. Essentially what it does is it's an expanded land use permit for those larger construction sites. It's generally required for anything over an acre and it's got to be disturbed area of an acre or those lots which are in continuous plans of development. And what those means is if you're in a subdivision that was developed with a VSMP permit, you are now required to get a VSMP permit for your individual lot. It mandates plan review and approval for the erosion sediment control plan, which we were previously doing under our E&S ordinance. It requires us to review and approve the stormwater management plan, which we were previously doing under our stormwater management ordinance and our MS4 permit. And it also requires site-specific pollution prevention plans and any TMDL special conditions that might be imposed on that particular site. For bacteria, I don't see much happening there, but there might be some special conditions required by the Chesapeake Bay. We don't know what those are because they're not listed in the action plan. But those are some just added things that will be required. The operator, the construction contractor, or the owner of the site must maintain what's a stormwater pollution prevention plan notebook at the site, which documents everything, his existing erosion sediment control, his stormwater management plan. All of that documentation has to be maintained at the site as long as the weekly inspection reports that they're required to do. And it must be available to the public. What we will do is the city will then inspect that site to make sure it's in compliance with that stormwater pollution prevention plan and the approved plans. The city will then, as part of the VSMP permit, will then provide post-construction BMP inspections, which we already do, and construction certifications and record drawings for those BMPs and long-term BMP maintenance, both of which are already required of our MS4 permits, so there's nothing new there. So our next steps in this overall program is we need to adopt that new ordinance. And the deadline from the state is May 15th, 2014. We'll probably bring this in April or early May to the regular council meeting. We have listed a draft copy of the ordinance in your packets. It needs to be we also need to adopt our new updated stormwater management plan. This is a document that was last created in 1997, and we've been operating our overall programs for the last 15 years under it. We've just recently been working on the updates to that, and we hope to have that implemented in the next few months. We will bring that for you sometime before July 1st when it's actually needed. And then finally, we will incorporate the VSMP permit fees and staffing requirements. Those are listed. City manager has assured me they're in his budget for FY15. And also, we will prepare the Chesbay TMDL action plan starting next year. And the other TMDL action plans the following year. And then we will begin those projects to meet our goals as soon as we can, but we've got to meet at least that 5% by fiscal year 18, and probably, hopefully, get caught ahead. And then finally, we've got 4 new MS4 permit conditions, or 3 new ones that we need to make sure happen in addition to those TMDL requirements, which is create those nutrient management plans in the next few years, get that stormwater pollution prevention plan for the city shop, and then increase our dry weather screening from 15 to 50 outfalls per year. And that's kind of the basic overall eye-glazing review of the stormwater management program. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Can you start over?
Thank you, Mr. Small. It's, I would have thought this was complicated before you spoke. I've got to, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, but I've got to ask one question first. Do you have any sense for how much of this is action-oriented facility work on the ground, or finding ways to physically eliminate pollutants versus how much is paperwork?
Of the MS4 permit, a good chunk of it is paperwork and documenting stuff that we already do. A lot of the new permit conditions is just, it's documenting. The few that require action on our part, I've tried to mention here. The nutrient management plans require us to do something. The stormwater pollution prevention plan, that's a document we've got to create in a few years for the city shop. I think some of that's going to be a lot of paperwork, but it may require, because it's got to be in a certain format, it might require some effort. We might have to hire a consultant to prepare that for us. Dry weather screening of the outfalls, that's going to require additional effort from our current staff. A lot of our public works crews on the streets crew go out and actually perform this dry weather screening. It's going to take a little longer than it used to.
Couple questions. Last year we implemented the phosphorus ban statewide.
Yes.
On commercially sold fertilizer. Any time frame on when we might see whether we know that's making a difference or not?
To tell you the truth, I wish I could tell you.
Yeah.
I know that the requirement for the watershed implementation plan, which started it, the time frame for that is basically 2025 and 2028, depending on which piece of regulation you look at. But that's when they're talking about finally saying this is going to help us meet our goal 15 years from now.
Gotcha. So, I think just maybe 2 or more situations here where the city's picking up extra permitting. Is there an estimated cost to that, or?
Well, as I mentioned, under only 7 permits last year, 7 of the 31 active permits would require us to issue a VSMP permit. It's only for the larger projects. Most of the projects that we get, when they redid the cookout last summer, didn't require a VSMP permit because they weren't impacting more than an acre. The new 7-Eleven on Page Street, too small to require a VSMP permit. So all of those little renovations wouldn't require it. It's the larger projects that do. Your Riversides, Capitol Landing Green.
Gotcha. Your answer to that kind of falls into my next question. We've got some pretty lofty goals by 2028, maybe 2018, 2023.
Yeah,
So
they're in 5-year increments.
for a city who's as built out as we are, how do you get to 100% without going into these older design neighborhoods and kind of maybe re-engineering some stormwater stuff that was done a long time ago?
Or in neighborhoods where it was never done.
Right.
And in many cases, there's almost no way to do that. You have to go into some of those other places. we've got one big advantage in the city of Williamsburg. We're at the top of the hill. And that makes all the difference in the world. Everything drains down. So we know where, right at our city boundaries, where the outfalls are, those are the easiest places to put stuff. We have our regional facilities. They help us. They won't help us so much on the TMDL because the TMDL, again, is based on the 2009 baseline conditions that we got to reduce from. And they won't let us count anything we've done prior to that towards that goal. So I've got an idea of what we're going to end up having to do, but right now they're just, pie in the sky ideas.
Gotcha.
We're hoping to formulate those into actual list of projects by the time we have to implement the stormwater management plan this summer.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It's quite an education. You can, certainly check that off of a good public service announcement there. If anybody asks me, what do these people do at the city? This is a great example of business that goes on behind the scenes that people don't get to appreciate. We should ask them, my response to them should be, well, look at the quality of our watershed in Chesapeake Bay and the value that has on the world, essentially. And so, these efforts that you all put forward as a staff to make sure that these processes are followed are, I think, invaluable. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. I think Mr. Filing's point about, a lot of this is paperwork. But without going through these steps, where does the chain break and then causes a problem? So I guess I just commend you all for paying attention to all this and figuring it out and staying on top of it to make sure that we're doing all that we can to protect our watersheds.
Well, and I will say, as I mentioned, it's not just me and moving around some paper. That's literally all I do is move the paper around. But it's the other folks in the other departments, other divisions in maintenance that actually get it done, and they do an excellent job of it. They actually make the job of documenting it very easy.
Thank you.
Aaron, thank you. That was interesting. In your list of talking about with whom we work on this, you didn't mention the health department. And they are still responsible for restaurant kitchens, septic systems. Where do they fit in all this?
That's a good question because they aren't mentioned anywhere in the WIP or our permit conditions. And it just so happens, like you talk about septic systems. We have very few septic systems in the city remaining. There's a few on the outskirts, and we've got them. We know where they are, which is kind of funny when we get a bacteria TMDL associated, and they say, "Oh, it's your septic systems." We don't have any, relatively compared to the outer areas. So it's one of those things that it does baffle you. And they are responsible for restaurants and grease, but we don't need to get involved as long as they put it where they're supposed to. If it goes into the sanitary sewers or into those, then we're in good shape. When we see that somebody's dumping or their grease trap overflows and then it flows down the gutter, that's when we need to get involved because it becomes an illicit discharge.
But one of the issues I can see, you mentioned Queens Creek and the fact that Queens Lake now has sewers, but my experience with that is that homeowners are not required to hook up to the sewer. So if they keep their septic systems, who's making sure that their septic systems are working? I mean,
You have to go look at the ordinances in that particular locality.
But
York County is required to track those septic systems,
right,
and make sure that they're pumping them out every 5 years to maintain their systems. If they have alternative septic systems, they must have maintenance agreements recorded for those. So there is a lot of legislation on that.
These are even the old septic systems that have been there?
And some of the old ones, they need to know where they are, and they still have to be maintained by the homeowner. But that's depending on the ordinance of the locality.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Could we go back to your map for just the
Which one?
the broad one that shows the entire region that is impacted by this? I guess I should know more about geography or geology, but it strikes me as interesting that we've got it looks like some of the parts of Western Virginia that are on the other side of the Blue Ridge flow into the Chesapeake Bay.
They flow into the Potomac, which flows north up to Harper's Ferry. And then
And
it
yet
starts
nothing
to flow
in
east.
Philadelphia comes down that way.
Philadelphia flows into the Delaware River.
I'm suspicious of that.
It's all, in Virginia, it's most of what is east of Allegheny flows
Yeah.
to James, and then with the exception of the northern part of Highland, all flows to James.
Three rivers,
The other side of where I grew up, all goes to the Potomac.
yeah, three rivers in particular form the 80% of the water of the Chesapeake Bay, which is the Susquehanna, which flows all the way out of New York. The Potomac River, out of West Virginia area, and then also the James River. Those form the three largest watersheds, and over 80% of the water, the fresh water that comes into the bay. So those are the
It's going to lead
targets.
me to another question. I want to get a better understanding of what the term TMDL means. Is it an objective objective measurement of an undesired, well, it's redundant, of a pollutant that's affecting a body of water? Or is it a term that's used when a body of water exceeds a certain measurement?
It is the effective limit. The way I like to describe the TMDL, the total maximum daily load, is the limit in which that water body can absorb that pollutant. And it's literally a number.
So are there times when you've used the term, a TMDL was issued, or, I mean, does that mean that there was an exceeding the limit?
If you've exceeded the limit, they've written down this is the limit.
And how is that determined?
Scientific studies go and they actually test the water, and then they determine based on the flow of the soils in the area. This is what maximum it can take.
So
And it is scientific based.
So I understand then that Queens Creek and Powhatan Creek, how they're close by, and you can understand how the city would have an impact, or what the direct impact is on those areas, because you can see where the flow is coming in. How does one know what impact the city has on the Chesapeake Bay?
Well,
It's TMDL.
essentially what they did, what the EPA does, is they look, here's how much the Chesapeake Bay, this is the maximum pollutant load that it can take of sediment, phosphorus, and nitrogen. Then they take, this is the maximum load, let's divvy up that load among the states. How they do it is based on watershed area.
Not on how much you're polluting?
In some ways, it is based on how you're polluting. So yes, certain states that are further downstream or smaller might get more penalized. And how do you determine how much you're polluting? In most cases, it's based, a lot of the calculations for sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus. For urban stormwater runoff, it's based on how much impervious area you have.
So when we get to what Mr. Foster referenced earlier, those 5-year goals of 5%, 35%, and 100%, 100% means that there's no more pollution, or the excess over the TMDL has completely
The
been
excess
eliminated?
over the TMDL is down.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
But then that's a collective goal.
Yes.
So whatever the city does isn't necessarily enough if all of the other 99.95% of the landmass in this region do the same.
That's correct.
That's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, but we need to do what we can in our target area. Just remember, we're just one target area of all these others.
And don't get me wrong, I'm concerned about the overall health of the bay, and I'm doubly concerned that we're doing our part. But I also feel that it's not quite right if we're somehow penalized for the inaction of others. Am I off base here?
No, you're not. And actually, that's probably the biggest argument against why are we targeting certain sectors. You know, the government's getting hit by urban stormwater, but who's doing anything about agriculture?
Right.
And so everything we've been doing over the last 20 or 30 years, so in response to the Chesapeake Bay Act, all of that pre-2009, that doesn't count. it's the situation as of 2009, so that we develop those major regional BMPs, for instance. So we're doing a lot to solve the problem and have done for years, but that's where, to me, it strikes me the most unfair to Williamsburg, because it just picks it up from, well, that's what you did for us yesterday. Now what are you going to do as of tomorrow to reduce your TMDL assignment?
And because you were already doing it compared to another locality that might not have been doing it, you get no credit for that.
Well, and they'll have an easier time, because as closer you get to 100%, it gets harder and harder and harder. You got to do more and more to get a little bit more pollution removal. So theoretically, if you've done nothing, it makes it easier, because the low-hanging fruit is still hanging.
Mr. Small, you talked about completing the mapping by 2015, and that's going to be a challenge for us?
I believe that is
Right here.
2017.
Oh, 2017, I'm sorry. So completing mapping by 2017, how daunting a task is that for the city? And again,
It's not as bad as I like to think it is.
Think about James City County. I mean, how much bigger they are.
They are larger in aerial extent, but James City County doesn't own anything. You're only responsible for the portion of properties that you own and operate. And in the case of James City County, they don't own any of their roads. So their roadside ditches, the pipes in the storm sewers in a neighborhood, they're not theirs.
It's all VDOT.
That's VDOT's MS4. VDOT's the one that's got problems.
There you go. Could say that again.
Whereas, so James City County, they only have to take care of parks, their government buildings, those areas. So they're I like to say they're larger in area than the city, but we're a larger MS4.
Can you talk to me about the logic behind the VSMP permits shifting from the state to the localities?
The basics of it, state wasn't doing it.
Oh,
They were going out and doing these inspections on a very periodic basis, and it was very hit or miss. The EPA told them, you're not getting it done. You need to get it to the people that can get it done. And so what they did is they said, well, get it to the localities. They're the ones that are actually got their feet on the ground. And so that's really what it comes down to.
okay. So it's kind of like telling one of your children, you're not cleaning your room, so I'm going to have the other child do it.
Seems that way.
Other than the ball fields in the city, do we have many areas of managed turf that are greater than an acre?
Well, there's a few areas that you have to be aware of. We do have the managed turf areas. We do have at least two areas greater than an acre within the right-of-way. We have the Richmond Road medians.
Oh, so
As we approach the city,
even though they're all separated and divided, they're considered one?
that one area is greater than an acre
Okay.
on Richmond Road as
The
we
one
enter the
farthest.
city.
Oh.
And then the other area is Route 132, right there at 132Y.
And we actually fertilize that?
We add a little bit. If it needs it, we mow the grass there and maintain it as turf. We also have the ball fields. And then the other added item on it has to do with the schools. The 3 city schools are maintained under our permit as opposed to James City County's. James City takes care of everybody else.
Do we get any credit for the work that I guess it's before 2009, the work that we do and have done around the Waller Mill watershed? Is that?
It's in York County. And so that becomes a special case. And one of the things we're looking into, one aspect of meeting TMDL requirements, is the state's trying to set up this nutrient trading program. And we may be able to use the work that we've done in the Waller Mill watershed to sell credits to, say, Newport News, who may not be able to do those measures downtown. So we can sell them credit so they meet the TMDL, even though we've done it.
And then theoretically, we might use that money to help
We
cover
use
the
that
costs
money
of
to
all this
build
other-
our own little stuff in the areas that we can't treat.
Well, I just want to say this is, It's a lot to bite off and chew. Thank you very much for the presentation, particularly the part up front with the acronyms, although I think you sprinkled a few more.
I did sprinkle a
within
few
that weren't
in
on the
there.
front page, but this is extremely helpful. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Small.
And we'll see you in a few months.
We'll look forward to it. This takes us to City Council communications. Do we have reports from any committees or other assignments? No? Thank you. It takes us to schedule of meetings for March 2014. Mr. Tuttle, anything you'd like to highlight?
Just point out that tomorrow at 4 p.m., we have the city-county joint school board meeting, and that will be at James Blair.
And if I may also point out, for those that are interested, it in some way ties into this, at 11 o'clock on Friday, or the Arbor Day awards ceremony at the community building. Next takes us to open forum. Mr. Chohan, would you like to speak again?
I think I used my 5 minutes in abundance.
Do we have anybody else who'd like to address council at this time? Seeing none, I believe that brings us to the end of the meeting.
Move we adjourn?
Second.
Ms. Judkins, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pond?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.